This lecture, our fourth on ancient Mesopotamia. The next group of peoples we're talking about are the ancient Phoenicians as well as the Hebrew people.
With the Phoenicians, we're going to start in 1100 BC, where people from modern-day Lebanon become the most powerful traders on the Mediterranean. When we talk about Phoenicia or the Phoenicians, we're not talking about a very specific country. There is an area where they start out and where they're kind of home from. But as we see, that very much a trading people on the Mediterranean. So they're going to be a shipbuilding, seafaring people, and thus there's no really like there's a place where you start, but the homeland is convoluted, but very much a collection of wealthy city-states that stretch around the Mediterranean Sea. To allow them to do that, shipbuilding and seafaring very important to them. There's one of the early Mediterranean great sea powers that we see from the Phoenicians. We know that they're the first to sail out of the Straits of Gibraltar. So I'm going to get my pen out. Let me get it. And so again, we've got there's Europe, there's Italy, going around there's North Africa. So again, they're coming from over here on the eastern edge of the Mediterranean. So they are the first to make it out of the Straits of Gibraltar, right? So going north on the Atlantic. They may have been the first to sail all the way around Africa, coming around on the other side over here. There's evidence of the Phoenicians trading in the Indian Ocean and in the Arabian Sea. However, it's a little bit uh, not as not as concrete evidence as very much because we know they got to India. However, with their extensive land trade routes throughout Europe and Asia, they very much could have gotten there by land, not necessarily going all the way around Africa the long way. But very important in terms of how they're able to, well, master the seas and be able to move freely on the Mediterranean, very much earlier than what the Greeks, another great powerful seafaring people, which we'll talk about in a couple units. Now, these city-states were obviously founded to trade with other peoples, which is a little different from some of the other groups that we see in Mesopotamia that are very much interested in conquest and conquering places. These are city-states to bring resources from one part of the Mediterranean to another and back and forth in those different ways. So examples of some of these city-states are City and Tyre with the production of red and purple dye. It's very hard to find in nature dyes that are one color fast that are going to be able to survive multiple washings and still retain their color, as well as too vibrant in what the Phoenicians were able to, on a much more massive and almost industrial scale, be able to create this dye and then be able to use it for cloth production. And we'll see the echoes of this throughout history, even till today, of this dye they're creating. We'll got a couple slides to explore that. Byblos becomes the center of the papyrus trade. Papyrus is a reed. We'll talk more about this with the Egyptians. It's nice. You can flatten it out, cut it into strips, and the natural adhesives and stickiness in the plant itself allows for it to kind of stick to itself, which allows it becomes a very cheap paper, which becomes what most people in the Mediterranean are going to be riding around for a very long time. And we can go with the other city-states as well as excellent craftsmen who are trading various different goods, particularly in gold, very good goldsmiths. Now, of all the colonies they find, their greatest colony they found is Carthage. Founded in 814 BC, it's located in North Africa and probably one, if not the best natural harbor in the entire Mediterranean Sea. We'll circle more back to it in the specifics when we get to our topic in a couple units. We'll bring back the Carthaginians. But one of the big, powerful colonies that they're able to set up will eventually see most of the Phoenicians move to this and be able to develop this as a major power in the Western Mediterranean. So there's a couple of dead Phoenicians for you. And again, the idea behind them being seafaring is the coastline which they set up is also, again, if you know a little bit from the Bible, heavily mountainous and wooded as you move farther east. So it's pretty difficult to walk from one of these places to other, but it's incredibly easy to sail. And that's going to kind of drive the seafaring nature of the Phoenicians, and then from cruising up and down the shoreline, then taking farther and farther ventures and extensive voyages westward across the Mediterranean with these. In the early 1920s, on the right, National Geographic magazine commissioned an archaeologist to go and build one of the Phoenician-style ships, and that's kind of what they came up with to work on the Mediterranean. And you can kind of see from the designs as we see them looking like. Lots of different city-states pocketing throughout the Mediterranean Sea, particularly on the coastline. And you can kind of, again, from where they start out here, very much moving across the Mediterranean and then working their way all the way into modern day Spain and Western North Africa. Again, we want to circle and highlight Carthage as the biggest, most powerful of the Phoenician city-states. Now, as we said, they're founding these city-states to be able to trade within different goods. And one of the goods that they're trading with is this purple dye to create wool and other materials that is dyed to this vibrant purple color. And we don't see this very often in a lot of the colors from the time period. We do get colors, but again, they're not going to hold up very well to multiple washings or be as kind of vibrant as the chemical dyes that we are able to make today. So it's easy for us to go buy a purple t-shirt from a store or online today. It's a lot harder to get one in particularly 3,000 years ago. And what the Phoenicians were able to do is very much kind of corner the market on this production of purple dye, of which you need to get it from sea snails. You need to go into the Mediterranean, harvest the snail out, and then either with a long, thin knife, go into the snail, extract one of its mucus glands to be able to go and get drop by drops the mucus they'd be able to then need to be mixed with sea and salt water, let it ferment, let it sit there in order to be able to turn various shades of purple and red, as well as be able to give it its properties of its color kind of fastness. And one of the key characteristics that was said of this dye was its ability to kind of retain its color and almost change color as more and more sunlight hit upon the cloth, as well as the dye itself, and over multiple washings to kind of very much make it unique amongst there. Now, the problem is if you're figuring this out, if it's going drop by drop and you have to harvest it from sea snails, this is extraordinarily hard to do. It's extraordinarily difficult. And so what this means is that at certain points in the Phoenicians' control over this trade, this dye would be worth more than an equivalent weight of gold or more than its weight in gold for how it would be able to do. You can sort of see the middle purple in there, and that blood red, almost vermilion color would be the most sought after color just because how extensive it needs to be able to do it. And again, the brilliance and the vibrancy of these colors compared to some of the other stuff. And so what that means, if you follow the logic, this is very expensive to make, it's very expensive to buy, and therefore the clothes of somebody wearing purple would be of someone who can afford to pay a lot of money for this. So what we see is purple becoming the color of that royalty and very wealthy would don to be able to show their wealth, to be able to go and do this. And this very much will tie into what we'll see with the Roman Empire and the Roman senators and the Roman emperors, the Byzantine emperors, as well into the kings and nobles of Europe, where purple very much represents royalty. The phrase to don the purple would mean to become the emperor in the Byzantine Empire. A child born to a Roman Empire would be said to be born into the purple, parphogenios. I think I got that right. So that's the type of things we're having. And again, when we're looking at this, is that you could get 12,000 of these different sales, and it would only give you about 1.4 grams of pure dye, which you really could only use to trim one single garment. So when you think of these Roman senators, they're not decked head to toe in this vibrant purple color. They've got just the trims, just some of the stitching on the collars and their cuffs purple and be able to show just how wealthy they are. So to have an entire garment made out of this would be extraordinarily extraordinarily wealthy and extraordinarily powerful in and of itself. And so you got to imagine the amount of work, the amount of effort, all the stuff that's going in it, as well as just simply handling these sea snails day in and day out. And the sources tell us just how badly these poor guys working with this dye would come home and smell from working with rotting fish mucus or rotting snail mucus every single day. The Talmud in the Talmud, the Hebrew Holy Book, which we'll get in a little bit later, describes that if you got married to a husband, and that husband decided to become one of these dyers to do that after marriage, and he came home smelling this on his hands every single day, that was grounds for divorce in the time period because of how bad this smelled. And you can see it's hard for some people to get divorced in 2024 today. So that's just one of the things that they're making their money and their wealth from. We see as well excellent trading in gold. This is a necklace on the right, and again, you can it's smaller, but we want to understand just the craftsmanship on the beadwork. These are earrings here on the right, and you can see here the jingle jangles of the bell work, as well as the bracelet and the intricacies and the details there, as well as on the left a solid gold shield made for and commissioned by one of the pharaohs of Egypt to be able to go and kind of wear. And then you can see the glass faces of these beads for, I forget this is a necklace or a bracelet, but the idea of, again, the craftsmanship and the details that they're able to do and be able to do that. So we're very much making the case for this idea that the Phoenicians are a trading people. As they're moving from one city-state to another, they're bringing goods, going to another port, trading them for another good, and then moving along the way. So in order to be able to allow for this to quickly and efficiently happen, a need develops for these Phoenicians to record these trade transactions quickly, clearly, boom, move on to the next place. And so what the Phoenicians develop is their Phoenician alphabet. And they take and create a phonetic writing system, which, as we talked about earlier with the development of cuneiform, a writing system that uses symbols to represent sounds, moving away from a pictographic writing system to one where different symbols represent different sounds. For example, this is a phonetic writing system, and that symbol right there stands for the sound S. So I system, and then I'll be able to go and put all of that together. And that allows for a lot of different things to happen, and then that becomes pretty important with the Phoenicians. They, as they're trading, are going to introduce this system to others they come in contact with, the people they're trading with, who are like, oh, hey, this system's nice. This is where we're able to get in. It's quick, it's efficient, it's clear. And one of the peoples they come in contact with this writing system are the Greeks. And the Greeks are going to adopt this writing system for their own language. The Romans are going to adopt and adapt the Greek system for their language. And the Catholic Church will adopt the Roman system of writing. The Catholic Church spreads. It gets to a place called England, and English very much is a straight line from our modern day system of writing in English to the Phoenicians. And we can very much see the development of there to the point of even the idea of the name for the Phoenician alphabet. Or our alphabet is alpha and bet, or alphabet, which is the first letter of the Phoenician alphabet, alpha, and the second letter, bet, comes from the Phoenicians themselves. Why this is a big deal is it makes learning much more accessible. There's 26 characters in English. Very easy to be able to go and learn all those different characters. We're working our way with my 2-year-old daughter. She's able to rattle off mostly pretty well her ABCs today. And again, can she write? Can she do that? Not really, but she can learn those. It's that easy. China has a very hard and long process of trying to divest itself of this pictographic system to a more phonetic system. So for a scholar of Chinese, you need to be able to know something like 10,000 different characters. And that's just to get to like the hop on pop, go dog goes of Chinese. And so 26 letters is a lot easier to learn than 10,000 different letters or characters. And again, and this idea of recording transactions quickly and clearly, you don't have to worry about, oh, I forgot this whisker on this sheep, so this means it's not a sheep, it's a lion, and it causes all sorts of problems. You want to be able to go in again in quick movements. I can make an A in 3 pen strokes. I can make a Y in 2. You can make a J in almost 1. So it very much makes it much more accessible. It can spread out there. Now, this isn't going to make everybody a genius. It's not going to make everybody a Shakespeare. It's not going to make everybody an Einstein, but allows for more people to engage with the language, more people ideas, helps it spread, and makes learning and ideas in becoming part of the learned world a lot easier. The Phoenicians also, with their ability to go and spread across the Mediterranean, also help spread this Sumerian culture that they're coming around with it to other peoples. It's not going to have as big of an influence outside the Mediterranean, but it is going to introduce these other Mediterranean peoples with some of the cultural aspects of the Sumerians that just the conquering on land of different groups we've talked about and will talk about will be able to do. Now, as we saw, as we're fading out here on the Phoenicians in 842 BC, a group that we'll get into our next lecture, the Assyrians begin to go on the warpath, capturing several eastern Phoenician city-states. The people there get the heck out of Dodge, and they move across the western Mediterranean, mostly to Carthage. And that's going to then put them, as the Carthaginian state rises, into conflict with another rising group there in a couple hundred years that we'll see play out in a couple of different units there. So here's an example of the Phoenician writing system on a stele, on a stone, and we can go and we can kind of see the scratches that are there. But we want to emphasize, we'll see this a little bit, it's very much not pictographic, it's very much symbolically representing the sounds rather than a symbol for a sheep, for a goat, for a cat. So as we can see, a lot of the letters that the Phoenicians are using will become letters that will transport themselves through time and place into our own language today. So maybe not the sounds itself, but very much the letters start to look pretty similar, if not maybe flipped or moved around here. Okay, I is, we'll pull out the laser pointer. The O here, the T, a W, a Y, a Z, an A on its side, and a backwards E, a backwards K, and L. So the sounds might not match up from ancient Phoenician, but the symbols that they're using very much are going to become influential as we move from the Phoenicians to the Greeks to the Latins and having that Latin language with the Catholic Church spread throughout Europe all the way up to this day. So the Phoenicians represent an important step as we move from very much this idea of a pictographic language, started off with the earliest of Egyptian hieroglyphics, to becoming a much more phonetic writing system to our modern Latin writing system that we use in English. And we can see over time how these letters have similarly evolved to become our modern writing system that we have today, and how the Phoenician script has very much spread and moved throughout the world, or at least the European world and the languages that way. And we can see this across a couple different ways, a couple different languages as well. So that's the big thing that the Phoenicians bring to us today. That's why they're important, is their writing system. And their writing system very much in terms of the Mediterranean world is a bridge from pictographic to phonetic, as well as becoming important to us in the United States today with our writing system. And again, you can very much see in a couple of these things a direct line from the Phoenicians to our writing system today. We can see a couple zigs, a couple zags, but that very much is important to our language and our writing that we have today. The next group of people we want to talk about, we're taking a hard left turn, are the Hebrew people. And the Hebrew people come from, and again, we're using a lot of different sources, a lot, and the Bible being the main source. And again, as a Catholic school that we're teaching from, we're going to very much just hit the highlights of this. We're not going to dive too deeply that you might get in your theology class. But the Hebrew people are from the Canaan is their home in a region called Palestine on the eastern edge of the Mediterranean. Now, luckily for historians, the early history of the Hebrews is written down in their book called the Torah. And the Torah contains the first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible or the Hebrew Holy Book. And it contains not just their history, but also the religion's most sacred writings and traditions. And where we get a lot of our knowledge and understanding about the early Hebrews comes from the Torah. We'll see a lot of this evolve, some places slightly, some places more, into the Old Testament of Christianity. And that becomes, again, a lot of things to be able to go and see how the Hebrews have developed as a people. Early on, and what very much marks the Hebrews as distinct from the other groups that we've discussed that we'll talk about in the Mesopotamian unit, is that the Hebrews are monotheistic and that they worship only one God. Now we'll see some other people that are monotheistic adjacent or monotheistic with a asterisk on there, but we want to understand that the Hebrews very much are worshiping just one and one God only. And again, a high school freshman history class, so we're not going to leave any quibbles or quabbles there. Very simple and easily monotheistic. Now, this one God very much opens up the early part of Hebrew history by choosing Abraham to be the leader of his people. Abraham, just a shepherd from Ur in Mesopotamia, will be chosen by God to lead the Hebrew people out of southern Mesopotamia, up the Tigris and Euphrates to the eastern edge of the Mediterranean in modern day, again, Lebanon, Israel, Palestine. We get a little politics we don't want to avoid just a little bit there. By 1800 BC, it's estimated that Abraham has moved his people there. They moved to the land of milk and honey in Canaan. However, over the next couple hundred years, as they're settling down, as they're trying to find their place in the region, they face drought, they face famine, and other things of that nature. 1650 BC, it's estimated that for whatever reason, whether it's the Hittites rampaging through the region, whether it's other peoples, whether it's climate change, whether it's a societal upheaval, for whatever reason, the Hebrews are moving into Egypt to become, if not a enslaved people, a subjugated people, a people looked down upon in that society. Now, as they're wandering from Mesopotamia to Canaan to Egypt, the Hebrews are going to be watched over by their God. And this God is going to provide them with the protection in turn for their obedience. And this is a covenant, all right, which is a promise made between God and Abraham, where Abraham, as the leader of the Hebrew people, will get the Hebrew people to be obedient to God and what God stands for and God's teachings. And in return, God will protect and watch over his chosen people in the Hebrews. So we see this a lot, and we can read this in the Torah. And a Torah traditionally is written as it was for thousands of years on a scroll. So you go to a synagogue, you traditionally you won't see a book on there. You can see a scroll there. Now, can I get one of these to read off the internet? Can I buy one for my house that's in a book form? Yes, you can. But traditionally, kind of that's the idea. Now, with the Torah, it's very much believed that the writings are coming from God Himself onto the page. That's what we're revealing. So these are God's words. So if you're somebody who's going needs to put their finger on the words and follow along, that's very much a no-no with a official real deal Torah here. And there's a special, and again, apologize for a lack of the terminology, a special stick that you're going and you're using to help you guide. Because some of these Torahs, you start to think of several hundred pages, how big this scroll is, to be able to guide you in reading some of the smaller script so that your fingers aren't touching, that you're not kind of putting your humanness onto God incarnate Himself in the words there. So that's very much something that we see with these kind of official Torahs that are still very much in existence today. And these books very much become some of the oldest writings we have of the foundings will eventually become the Christian church, which, and again, the Catholic church here at a Catholic school that we're teaching at, as well as some of the oldest surviving texts that we have in book form of people from this region. So that's what we go and we see and can see how that eventually evolved into our modern Bible for the Catholics, Christians around the world today. So this is Abraham, and he finally wanders out of the desert into Canaan. Now, we all know this story pretty well. There's been multiple movies made about it. The Hebrews run into hard times while they're in Egypt, and eventually they get the heck out of there. And it's estimated between 1300 to 1200 BC, the book of the Bible called Exodus, where the Hebrews exit out of Egypt. They go and they leave under the leadership of Moses. Moses gets them out of Egypt. They got to wander through the Sinai Peninsula. Eventually, Moses is called up and receives the Ten Commandments from God, carved onto stone, given to him. And these Ten Commandments form the basis for civil and religious laws in Judaism. Now, the other important thing that happens from these Ten Commandments is this idea that now a new covenant is formed. With Abraham, you just had to be obedient to God. But again, we get into the question of what does it mean to be obedient? What does God want? Now, God very clearly is spelling out here are the 10 things that I want you to go and do. And in return for following these commandments, God is going to protect me, going to protect the Hebrew people. Eventually, these commandments will form the basis for a much longer code of laws regulating the social and religious behavior of the Hebrew people. So you can read these if you're, again, at Yale Catholic here, or you can read these in a modern Bible, or very much the books of the Bible, Deuteronomy and Leviticus, very much become much more of this law code regulating what you can and can't do as a Hebrew in their society. Now, these laws are very much going to be interpreted by religious teachers, and this emphasis on correct conduct and the worship of one God creates this almost philosophical idea of ethical monotheism, which we don't see. Again, we'll talk about other religions that are maybe monotheistic asterisk or monotheistic in quotation marks, but Christianity, Judaism very much will settle on this idea of one and only one God. And by the following of these ethics of that, that creates a much different philosophy for living a life, for how one interacts with the world around them, that we don't see with, say, polytheistic religions or other religions of the time period or on the earth. So that very is again a philosophical idea that separates the Hebrews from some of the other groups that they're coming in contact with. We know the story that Moses will eventually see his people resettle back in Canaan. Once there, they become a much more sedentary, and by sedentary, we're talking about just staying in one place and farming, less of a shepherding, livestock herding people like we saw under Abraham. So sedentary, and they're not just sitting on the couch, sedentary that they're becoming a farming, less nomadic people. And politically, they're going to loosely organize themselves into 12 separate tribes. And in times of crisis, God would appoint a judge or judges to lead all the tribes to be able to go and get them out of the trials and tribulations of that time period. And you can read about that time period in those people in a book of the Bible called Judges, which again very much goes and spells out a lot of this history. So you've seen the Prince of Egypt, the cartoon. You've seen the Ten Commandments. This is a pretty famous story told over and over again of the Hebrews being subjugated, enslaved. It might be one interpretation of it while they're in Egypt. They don't like this, so they try. Eventually, will leave under Moses, and you see the still from Cecil B. DeMille's "The Ten Commandments" with Charlton Heston leading the people off the movie set here into the desert. While they're in the desert, they wander around. Eventually, the up Mount Arafat, the Moses goes, and again, right from the Ten Commandments, there's Charlton Heston as Moses holding those Ten Commandments, where God is going and saying, "These are the 10 things you need to do in order to follow me." And again, this is the big idea that a covenant is forming between the Hebrews and their God. That if you follow the commandments, God will protect you. And we'll see how that changes, and you can very much follow the course of how different peoples use the word covenant. Jesus will famously say this bread and wine, this body and blood will form a new covenant between Jesus and God and the people. And we can see how that changes over time, starting with this idea of the covenant between Moses and the Ten Commandments. Eventually, of those 12 tribes of Israel, only one large tribe is left, the Judah tribe, and that's again where we get the name Jews, Jewish people, Judaism derives from. From about 1020 to 922 BC, three kingdoms are going to help unite the kingdom of Israel and lead the Hebrews to a much more important place politically within the peoples around them. The King Saul is going to drive enemies out of central Palestine. King David is going to unite the tribes, establish the capital of Jerusalem, and then King Solomon is going to create a larger trade network. He's going to build a great temple in Jerusalem. We're going to circle back in a second and help beautify the city. If you're following the logic here, we've got 12 tribes. Now they've coalesced, united under one. They still might have some differences of opinion and not like how things are doing, particularly in how tax money might be spent. And Solomon's beautification of the city of Jerusalem is very costly and becomes unpopular to certain segments of this united Judea. Therefore, in 922 BC, the kingdom is then going to divide, with Israel, the kingdom of Israel in the north, and the kingdom of Judah in the south. Now, as we'll see in the next unit, by 730s, Judah and Israel are going to be threatened by the Assyrians, a very highly warlike people, and very much we're going to make the case in the next lecture how big of a bullies they are. So the Israelites, right, the Jewish people are going to pay tribute to the Assyrians, and tribute is peace money paid by a weaker power to a stronger one, where the Jews are going to pay tribute to the Assyrians to keep the Assyrians from taking over their lands and doing that. Very much think about, why does a bully what does a bully want from you on the playground? A bully wants from you on the playground, they want your lunch money. So you pay the bully your lunch money so that they get their lunch money, and then you don't get beaten up. And that's a form of kind of, you see that in all the kind of cartoons and movies to kids these days. A bully come and beat you up for your lunch money. And so that's very much kind of what you can think this is. Other groups are going to rise into power from this area as well. 722 BC, Israel. Then in 586 BC, Judah is going to fall to foreign powers. And in 586 BC, the Neo-Babylonians are going to go into Jerusalem, take over the city, burn it to the ground, destroy the temple and all that stuff. And any of the surviving Jews are then exiled from their homeland into Babylon. And this is referred to, and we saw this with a question of the day already, called the Babylonian captivity. This is a big deal, okay, particularly in the how Judaism is going to work, particularly in how Judaism will morph into Christianity. This separation of the Jewish people from their temple, separation from literally the house of where God is on earth, is very going to fundamentally and conceptually change Judaism, moving toward this idea of the focus on ethics and other things to show your worship of God rather than physical actions. And we'll circle back to this, but a very big deal here. In 539 BC, the Persians are going to conquer Babylon and allow the Jews to return, which is going to reunite them with Jerusalem and what they're going to do there. So to finish up, we've got Palestine, we got there, and again, here is our temple that we see here. We've got the altar where you would go and do your sacrifices. This is something a lot of people are doing. The temple in both the first and second temples becomes a major economic where slaughtering is being happened, and you might consume it yourself or sell it to others or give it to God. Only priests are able to enter into the temple itself, and only the Holy of Holies, right, where God himself sits on two cherubim with the Ark of the Covenant containing the Ten Commandments, with his footrest, his ottoman, and only once a year with a priest is able to go and talk to literally God itself. His footprints are carved into the floor. And so that's what we go to see. So the question becomes, what happens when we physically remove the Jews from where their God is, and how that's going to develop? How do you worship God? If God, you can't go and see him, God very much changes from a almost physical being in the temple to something that very much becomes the omnipotent, all over, all encompassing God that we know of modern day Christianity. And that's a major conceptual shift that only happens because the Jews are separated from their temple, from their city, from their God during the Babylonian captivity. One of the groups that's working to do this are the Assyrians, and that's where we're going to go and see and move in our next lecture.